There is something almost elemental about bread. Long before we had names for carbohydrates, long before biochemistry gave us the language to describe what happens when wheat starch meets saliva, human beings were grinding grain, mixing it with water, and coaxing it into something warm and nourishing over fire. Bread is not simply food. It is a civilization made edible. And yet here we are, in an age of extraordinary nutritional awareness, asking a question that would have seemed absurd to almost every generation before ours. What happens when we stop eating it? This is not a trivial question. And it is not a simple one. To answer it honestly, we must sit with the body for a while. We must follow glucose through the bloodstream, listen to the gut as it adjusts and protests and eventually adapts. Watch the brain as it searches for its preferred fuel and discovers that it is more flexible than anyone gave it credit for. We must also be honest about the fact that bread is not one thing. It never was. The dense, slowly fermented sourdough made from whole rye flour and the airy white sandwich bread produced at industrial scale share a name but very little else. And so when we ask what happens if you stop eating bread, we are really asking a question that carries within it a dozen smaller questions, each worthy of its own reflection. Let us begin where the body begins, with digestion. When you eat a slice of bread, the moment it enters your mouth, an enzyme called amylase begins breaking down the starches in that bread into simpler sugars. This happens with remarkable speed. By the time you swallow, the process is already well underway. Those sugars, primarily glucose, move through the stomach and into the small intestine, where they are absorbed into the bloodstream. In response, your pancreas releases insulin, a hormone whose job it is to escort that glucose into your cells, where it becomes energy. This entire sequence happens so efficiently, so automatically, that we rarely think about it. It is one of the body's most practiced routines. Now imagine that routine being interrupted. On the first day that you stop eating bread, the body notices the change not dramatically, but quietly. The usual morning surge of glucose is missing. If bread was a significant part of your diet, this matters. Your blood sugar rises a little more slowly in the morning. Insulin is called upon less urgently. For many people, this subtle shift is actually comfortable. That mid-morning energy crash that so often follows a carbohydrate-heavy breakfast begins to ease. But this is only the beginning of a much longer conversation between the body and its new reality. By the end of the first week, something more significant is happening in the muscles and liver. These organs store glucose in a form called glycogen, which you can think of as the body's short-term energy reserve, the fuel that is held ready for immediate use. When dietary carbohydrates decrease substantially, these glycogen stores begin to deplete. And here is something that surprises many people. Each gram of glycogen is stored alongside roughly 3 grams of water. So as glycogen is used up and not fully replenished, the body releases a notable amount of water. This is why people who reduce bread and other carbohydrates often notice a drop in body weight within the first week, not because fat has been lost in any significant amount, but because the body is simply carrying less water. This is an important distinction to hold on to and one that gets lost in the excitement of early results. Water weight is real weight, in the sense that the scale reflects it. But it is not the same as the slow, meaningful reduction of adipose tissue that represents genuine metabolic change. The body is not being deceived. It is simply adjusting its storage. Around the second week, something more interesting begins to unfold, particularly in the liver. When carbohydrate intake remains low, the liver begins ramping up a process called gluconeogenesis, a word that means quite literally the creation of new glucose. The liver is extraordinarily capable of producing glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, amino acids from dietary protein, glycerol from fat breakdown, lactate from muscular activity. The body, you see, is not helpless without bread. It has backup systems for its backup systems, evolutionary inheritances from a time when food was unpredictable and the organism had to be resourceful. Alongside gluconeogenesis, another process accelerates, ketogenesis. When the liver breaks down fatty acids, it produces molecules called ketone bodies, beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone. These ketones can cross the blood-brain barrier and serve as an alternative fuel for the brain, which under ordinary circumstances prefers glucose almost exclusively. The discovery that the brain can run on ketones was, in some ways, one of the more philosophically significant findings in metabolic science. It challenged the idea that carbohydrates are essential, not in the sense that they are not useful, but in the sense that the body can manage without a continuous dietary supply of them. By the third week, if bread has been genuinely and consistently removed from the diet, the metabolic landscape has shifted in ways that are measurable and real. Fasting insulin levels in many individuals will have decreased. The insulin sensitivity of the cells, that is, how readily they respond to insulin signal, may have improved. Blood triglycerides, which are a form of fat that circulates in the blood and is closely linked to carbohydrate intake, often decline. HDL cholesterol, the kind associated with cardiovascular protection, may rise. These are not universal outcomes. Genetics, overall diet quality, activity levels, and individual variation all play a role. But they are patterns that appear with enough consistency in the scientific literature to take seriously. The gut, too, is undergoing its own quiet revolution. Bread, particularly whole grain bread, carries significant amounts of fiber, both soluble and insoluble. This fiber feeds the vast community of microorganisms that live in the large intestine, collectively known as the gut microbiome. When bread is removed, the fiber that those microorganisms relied upon may diminish, depending on what replaces it in the diet. The microbiome is extraordinarily sensitive to dietary change. Within days of a significant dietary shift, the composition of the microbial community begins to change. Certain species thrive, others recede. Whether this shift is beneficial or detrimental depends almost entirely on what takes bread's place. A person who removes bread and replaces it with vegetables, legumes, and whole fruits is likely supporting a rich and diverse microbial community. A person who removes bread and replaces it with processed meats and very little plant matter may be doing the opposite. This is the part of the conversation that is so often missing from popular discussions of bread elimination. The question is never only about what you are removing. It is equally, and perhaps more importantly, about what you are adding. The body does not experience an absence, it experiences a replacement. Every meal is an opportunity either seized or missed. There is also the matter of brain chemistry and mood, which deserves honest attention. Carbohydrates and bread provides them in abundance, stimulate the release of serotonin, a neurotransmitter deeply involved in mood regulation, sleep, and emotional stability. The pathway involves tryptophan, an amino acid that competes to cross the blood-brain barrier. When carbohydrates raise insulin, other amino acids are drawn into muscle cells, leaving tryptophan with a clearer path to the brain, where it is converted into serotonin. This is part of why carbohydrate-rich foods can feel comforting in a genuinely biochemical sense, not merely psychological, but chemical. When bread is removed from the diet, some people notice a period of irritability, low mood, or mental fog, particularly in the first 1 to 2 weeks. This is the brain adjusting to a new fuel environment, the neurochemical landscape reconfiguring itself. For most people, this phase passes. The brain finds its equilibrium. But it is worth acknowledging because it helps explain why dietary change is never purely physical. The mind is embedded in the body. What we eat shapes how we feel, and how we feel shapes whether we continue to make the choices we have set out to make. To dismiss the emotional dimension of dietary change is to misunderstand the human being who is living it. By the fourth week, the end of our 30 days, the person who has removed bread from their diet and maintained that commitment is living in a meaningfully different metabolic state than the one they began in. What exactly that difference looks like depends on so many variables that it would be dishonest to prescribe a single narrative. For some, the change has been profoundly positive, clearer thinking, more stable energy throughout the day, reduced bloating and digestive discomfort, better sleep, a sense of lightness and agency in relation to food. For others, the transition has been rocky, the benefits subtle or absent, and the social difficulty of navigating a world built around bread, the morning toast, the sandwich at lunch, the dinner roll, the birthday cake, has been its own ongoing challenge. Both experiences are real. Both deserve to be honored. What the science asks us to recognize is that bread, again, especially highly refined white bread, sits at a particular intersection of ease and consequence. It is easy to eat, easy to digest, easy to overconsume. It spikes blood glucose rapidly, demands a proportional insulin response, and in large quantities over long periods contributes to a metabolic environment associated with insulin resistance, systemic inflammation, and metabolic syndrome. These are not hypothetical risks. They represent a genuine burden that sits at the center of public health challenges across much of the industrialized world. And yet, here is where the reflection must be honest. Bread is also deeply, meaningfully nourishing for billions of people. Whole grain bread provides B vitamins, iron, magnesium, fiber, and a matrix of phytochemicals that interact with the human body in ways we are still working to fully understand. For populations with limited access to diverse foods, bread is a cornerstone of nutritional adequacy. To speak disparagingly of bread as a category is to speak without context, without humility, and without the awareness that nutritional privilege, the ability to curate one's diet with care and abundance, is not universally available. This is why the 30-day experiment undertaken thoughtfully is not an act of rebellion against food. It is an act of listening. It is the body being given a chance to show you something about itself that the noise of habitual eating often obscures. When you remove something significant from your diet and pay attention to what happens, not with anxiety, not with obsession, but with genuine scientific curiosity, you are performing a kind of personal research that no population study can replicate. You are studying a sample size of one, yourself. And what the body tends to reveal, if you are listening carefully, is that it is far more adaptable than we assume. It does not require any single food to function well. It requires nourishment, adequate energy, adequate protein, adequate micronutrients, adequate fiber, adequate hydration, adequate rest. These requirements can be met in many ways, across many dietary traditions, using many combinations of foods. The body is less rigid than our food culture often implies. It is more forgiving, more creative in its biochemistry, more willing to work with you than we sometimes fear. What 30 days without bread can teach, more than anything else, is something about the nature of metabolic flexibility, the body's capacity to shift between fuel sources, to draw from glucose when it is abundant and from fat and ketones when it is not. This flexibility is not just metabolically significant. It is, in a deeper sense, a kind of biological wisdom. An organism that can only survive in one specific nutritional environment is fragile. An organism that can adapt, that can find energy in different forms and maintain function across varying conditions is resilient. Human beings evolved that resilience over hundreds of thousands of years. Our modern food environment, with its relentless abundance of refined carbohydrates, has in many ways suppressed that flexibility. And in choosing, for 30 days, to eat differently, to ask the body to reach for different tools, we are not starving it of something it needs. We are, perhaps, reminding it of something it already knows. There is, too, Something worth saying about attention. The act of removing bread forces a kind of mindfulness about eating that most of us do not practice in ordinary life. Bread is everywhere, in everything, used as filler, as binder, as vehicle, as comfort. When you commit to not eating it, you begin reading labels, asking questions, planning meals, making choices that previously required no thought at all. This attentiveness is itself valuable, independent of any metabolic outcome. Learning to pay attention to what you eat, to understand the composition of your meals and the effects they have on your body, is a form of self-knowledge that serves health across an entire lifetime. But let it also be said that the goal is never rigidity. The science of nutrition, when read honestly, does not point us toward any single diet as the universal answer. It points us repeatedly toward patterns, diets rich in whole plants, adequate in protein, varied and colorful, minimally processed, eaten in reasonable amounts, shared with other people when possible. Bread can be part of that pattern. It does not have to be. What matters is not any individual food, but the larger ecosystem of eating in which that food exists. So what happens if you stop eating bread for 30 days? The truthful answer is that the body shifts. It adjusts. It negotiates with itself, calls upon older pathways, discovers that it is more capable than it was being asked to demonstrate. Some people feel better. Some feel about the same. Some feel temporarily worse before feeling clearer. Almost everyone learns something about their digestion, their energy, their relationship with comfort and habit, and the stories they tell themselves about what they need. And perhaps that learning, that moment of honest looking, is the most durable benefit of all. Not the number on the scale, not the insulin sensitivity, not the triglycerides, though all of these may well improve, but the simple, profound act of paying attention to a body that carries us through the world and asks so little in return for what it quietly, continuously does. That is worth 30 days. That is worth almost any amount of curiosity we can bring to it.